In this week's presentation, we're briefly going to discuss energy, weight, and fitness. The objectives of this lesson are to compare and contrast the energy pathways. We'll be able to state the three major components of our daily energy requirements. By the end of this presentation, you'll be able to define a healthy weight, list the factors that influence body fat levels, describe methods for assessing our body fat composition and overall body weight, and lastly, we will discuss nutritional needs of athletes. Some important concepts to establish before moving forward in this lecture is to remember that exercise complements our overall nutritional goals, and exercise will decrease our risk factors and improve our quality of life. Our ability to work, produce change, and maintain a quality of life all requires energy. Our body weight reflects the factors within our control, but also considers the factors outside of our patient's control as well. So then the question is, how do we define or determine energy? And how do we understand energy in terms of the amount of energy food contains? Well, one way is by using a bomb calorimeter. And this is an instrument that is designed to burn food while measuring the amount of heat or energy that is released from the burning of that particular element. And it provides only an estimate of energy that's available to humans as the form of food energy. But because the bomb calorimeter method is more efficient than the human body, the kilocalorie value assigned to a food item needs to be adjusted to reflect the limitations of our overall human system. So the amounts listed on food tables are already reflective of this adjustment. There is another method, however, and this method of assessing food energy is proximate composition, which determines grams of carbs, grams of proteins, and grams of fat within each food item. The grams are then multiplied by the energy value of each of those elements. Carbs, we assign 4 kilocalories per gram. For proteins, we also assign 4 kilocalories per gram. However, with fats, we assign 9 kilocalories per gram. And the sum of these calculations will then total the energy content of that specific food. So we remember in our previous reading that carbohydrates digest into glucose, triglycerides to fatty acids, and also glycerol. And proteins will digest or break down to amino acids. So we're going to continue our talk from that point. The nutrients release energy when they are broken down. We also can use the term catabolized. Once catabolism takes place, it will form carbon dioxide and water. The released energy becomes caught within ATP or adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the fuel for all our energy requiring processes within the body. Glucose releases energy, converts it to carbon dioxide and water through 3 different processes. The first process is glycolysis, which is shown here. Then we will talk about the TCA cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. So, talking about glycolysis, which is the net result of the conversion of glucose to carbon compounds and then producing pyruvic acid and ATP. So we're going to be taking a very high level approach to this discussion as you've had more depth in your physiology course. So part of the process is going to also depend on niacin and other B complex vitamins in our body. The main idea is that through glycolysis, oxygen is not needed. Because of this, the lack of the need of oxygen, this is an anaerobic pathway. Anaerobic pathways provide us momentary, quick ways to provide energy for the different activities that we need throughout the day. But it cannot provide a continual stream of energy. This type of exertion is limited because oxygen is not available quickly enough to help support increased needs of energy. So, the incomplete use of glucose causes pyruvic acid to be converted eventually to lactic acid. And when this acid builds up, this is when we feel muscle stiffness and soreness in perhaps our muscles as well. So, the exertion will eventually stop because our body will react to pain. Within a few minutes, enough oxygen is going to be available again to break down the lactic acid, which will relieve the physical discomfort. This is called oxygen debt. And this anaerobic pathway is taking place within the cytoplasm. So let's contrast this to an aerobic pathway. Aerobic pathways are oxygen dependent, and they occur within the mitochondria of the cell. In the mitochondria, pyruvic acid, which remember we made without oxygen, will react with coenzyme A and create acetyl coenzyme A right here in the middle. This energy process continues as acetyl coenzyme A reaches, now we're at the TCA cycle. The reactions that are part of this cycle will then further lead to the formation of the production of additional ATP and carbon dioxide as well. Remember that it's an aerobic pathway. Aerobic pathways are the primary source for exercise. This can be very low endurance, low intensity, but also very high endurance type activities or exercises as well. Now we're moving on to the last process of glucose conversion, which you will see here below. This is the glucose conversion to energy called the oxidative phosphorylation. And the number of actions that have led up to the release of hydrogens in the forms of water and additional energy has been captured in ATP. That term oxidative is really reflective of the combination of hydrogen with oxygen to form water. Phosphorylation is the creation of phosphate that is now going to bond to form ATP. Now we're moving on to fat as the source of energy. And the first step in using fat for energy is a process called hydrolysis. Hydrolysis will break down glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Glycerol will then move to change into pyruvic acid that we can use for anaerobic energy. The fatty acids will undergo an irreversible process known as beta oxidation, which we will use then to break down fatty acids into the much needed acetyl coenzyme A molecules. Eventually, through fat breakdown, we have acetyl coenzyme A molecules that will help with the beginning of the TCA cycle, and we end up right back here. This is very much like how acetyl coenzyme A was brought into the TCA cycle from carbohydrates. Now, amino acids or proteins will break down and are first catabolized through deamination. The liver and kidneys process the nitrogen-containing amino acids and other amino acid components through this energy metabolism pathway. They're going to convert or enter metabolism through different locations. And some of the amino acids are converted to pyruvic acid, but others become intermediaries of, again, the TCA cycle. And they will be part of the acetyl groups that are needed for this acetyl coenzyme A production. We also need to note that the three nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, can all be used for energy when consumed in excess. So, this means that our body can store these extra nutrients. When we have extra fat, our body is going to store this as fat in the body. But if we have extra carbs or extra proteins, this all can also be stored as fat. So when too little energy is used or consumed throughout the day, then we have a surplus of energy, which again turns into excess fat, regardless of the source. The first stored energy used is glycogen, followed by adipose cells. Blood-borne glucose is needed and must be available to the brain. So it is important that we have this breakdown so that it could travel to feed our brain energy. Only a small portion of triglycerides can yield glucose. And the continuous use of glycerol or triglycerides as a source will result in a buildup of ketones and a potential imbalance of our body's pH. The body prefers spare protein for important functions like the rebuilding and the repair of cells and tissues. How does our body know what type of energy to use? So the muscles will provide energy through the breakdown of, again, we remember carbs, lipids or fats, and then proteins. But it really is going to depend on the intensity and the length of the activity that the person is engaging in, their personal fitness level, and the foods that they eat or consume. Let me give you an example. If a person is only engaging in short, very high intense activities like sprinting, we may be able to get away with providing enough energy through the anaerobic pathway. And during this breakdown, remembering from previous slides that only carbs are going to be used, primarily from muscle glycogen. However, if we have another patient that is engaging in low to moderate intensity exercises, like somebody in a spin class, then we need to not only have anaerobic energy, but we need to really support this energy need by the aerobic system. And this is why we call it aerobic exercise. We're going to use carbohydrates and fats as well. So in this case, fats are an important energy source during this type of exercise because unlike carbs, fatty acids are abundant in the body. The length of activity determines what type of fuel our muscles will use also. As we increase in the duration, for instance, let's say someone is running a marathon, the glycogen stores are going to become depleted at some point, and then fat becomes a primary source of energy. A person that is very sedentary will break down glycogen faster. As a result, then will have more lactic acid building up in their tissues, as opposed to someone that is active and engaging in aerobic activity and aerobic energy production. So let's go back to the sedentary person. The lactic acid will cause muscle fatigue and other type of similar symptoms. However, that physically fit person, they have a higher aerobic capacity. Their heart is able to also supply oxygen at a higher capacity. So now there's more oxygen available and quicker and greater quantity. This is going to allow the use of the aerobic pathway of energy to be primary. It will help decrease lactic acid buildup, decrease those physical symptoms of muscle fatigue as well. It also means that the more fat will be broken down during aerobic exercise, then glycogen can be used for fuel. So, the question we need to consider is how to maintain a healthy weight. We need to think about how much energy is being used every single day versus the energy that we are consuming in terms of food. Because of many patients' sedentary lifestyles, some patients will need less energy than the standard requirement charts that are recommended. However, with very competitive athletes, these patients may need increased amounts of energy because we need to support their additional training, their competition schedule, and also their desire or need to achieve their personal best, which increases the amount of energy that they will need overall. Well, let's think about patients that are ill in the hospital. Under acute settings, their body is trying to adapt to perhaps a chronic disease, requiring additional energy. So, in the hospital, we're thinking about how these patients specifically need to intake levels and recalculate these energy levels to meet the physiologic changes at that time. And this is when we would consider consulting with registered dietitians and nutritionists to help to calculate the needs for our patients. There are some misconceptions, however, about energy needs that can be eliminated by additional nutritional counseling in the hospital and even post-acute care. And it doesn't matter the nature of the health disorder. It doesn't need to be a chronic disorder. It can be a very acute and very quick hospitalization. All patients can benefit. Now, the energy values are going to be based on the individual, and it's going to determine or be determined by how much they are active. So, are they engaging in light to moderate activity, or do they have increased energy needs? The average daily energy intake for a 19 to 24-year-old man, for instance, is 2,900 kilocalories. If you calculate it out, it's about 40 kilocalories per kilogram. 2,200 kilocalories or 38 kilocalories per kilogram is the referenced range for a woman between the ages of 19 to 24. However, if a person is more active than another person, or if their body's composition is larger or smaller, we also need to make adjustments. So it's not just based on age. The activity levels are simply a guideline. The only accurate recommendation is going to be one that supports a healthy weight level. And this is something that our nutritionists and registered dietitians are very capable in helping us to determine at the bedside or even in a clinic or community environment. Many different formulas have been developed to estimate the energy expenditure. Some of them are more complicated than others, but an easy way to determine how many kilocalories are needed is to multiply the weight by one of the numbers that are on the table in your book. For example, for a 170-pound man or a 77-kilogram man who has participated in moderate exercise is going to need 3,060 calories a day. And this is just an average. If the person weighs less or participates in less active exercise, then they may need fewer kilocalories than the person that is a little bit more active. Therefore, we can say that the energy requirement depends on many variables like basal metabolism, physical activity, and also the thermic effect of food. Basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy that's required to maintain the life sustaining activities like our breathing, blood circulation, our heart's ability to beat, our body's ability to secrete hormones. BMR, or basal metabolic rate, is the rate at which the body spends energy to keep up with all our life sustaining processes. And we measure BMR in the morning when we wake up, before any physical activity has occurred. And then we measure it again at 12 to 18 hours after the last meal. One consists of placing the human subject in a chamber and then measuring the body heat that the patient gives off. This is reflecting the energy used by the body for the most basic functions like breathing and circulation and hormonal functions. The second method, where we measure 12 to 18 hours after the last meal, isn't going to be part of the indirect measuring. And we use a calorimeter, measuring the respiratory quotient or the exchanges of gases, as a person breathes in and out of a mouthpiece on a machine. And then this quotient will determine the amount of oxygen used and the amount of CO2 that's expired, carbon dioxide. And this is also going to give us a measurement of BMR. Okay, so there's two different ways to do this. The third component of energy is the output, or the energy required for our body to digest, absorb, metabolize, and store our food. We call this the thermic effect of food. When we eat, the body cells will increase their activities because they are working. This increase in cellular activity is the TEF, thermic effect of food. Sometimes it can also be called the diet-induced thermogenesis. It's relatively small, this effect, and only accounts for less than 10% of our body's total energy needs per day. So what other factors affect our BMR, or basal metabolism, or basal metabolic rate? Our age affects it, our body size, our sex, body temperature, fasting versus starvation mode, any stress we undergo, menstruation may change our BMR, and our overall thyroid function. BMR will vary with the amount of lean tissue in our body versus fat or adipose tissue. Higher levels of lean body mass will increase the BMR. So let's think of an example. Men actually have higher BMRs than women because of larger body size with more lean body tissue. The BMR of adults slowly lowers as we get older. After age 35, our BMR actually slows down, and even more so if our patient is physically unfit. The process of sustaining fitness maintains the muscle mass of lean body tissue and slows the loss caused by aging. So when we talk to our patients during patient education and we talk about physical fitness, it's not just to gain muscle mass for the sake of being muscular, but also reminding them that their lean body tissue is helping to increase their BMR, which will overall help with the way their body uses energy. BMR, again, also depends on our thyroid function. So if a patient has a lack of thyroid hormone, thyroxine, this may also affect their BMR because thyroxine is a key basal metabolic rate regulator. The more thyroxine the body's able to produce, the higher the BMR. And of course, the inverse is true. Production of too much thyroxine can cause a increased higher BMR, but it's not a desirable effect either. So a patient with low thyroid hormone or hypothyroidism will naturally have a lower basal metabolic rate. The second largest component of energy expenditure is called physical activity. And any body movement can be considered physical activity. Anything where our skeletal muscles need to engage is going to result in the use of energy, or what we'll term energy expenditure. Now, that total energy need is going to be different for a person that is exerting a lot of body movement throughout the day versus someone that is very sedentary. It demands about 20 to 30% of our total energy needs. And one of the components that varies the most is our physical activity. The amount of energy we expend is going to depend on the intensity and the duration of the activity, of course, but also the length of activity and how much energy or intensity we're exerting to complete this. So let me give you an example. Two people can walk the same distance, but if someone is walking faster with more intense movement, then they are going to require more energy. If someone is getting up to walk versus sitting in their car to work, then the walking is going to require more energy. Even a moderate activity can become one of the high energy activities that you can discuss with your patients. Moderate walking can have a positive effect if carried on for a longer amount of time. Now, body size affects our energy expenditure more than any other single factor. I'm going to say that one more time. Even though we have all the other factors, our body size is affecting our energy expenditure more than any other single factor. What does this mean? A person that is heavier is going to use more energy to perform the same task than a person that is lighter. A person that is 205 pounds will require more energy to complete the same task than a person that weighs 120 pounds. Adaptive thermogenesis is another important concept in the terms of energy expenditure. And adaptive thermogenesis is the energy that our body uses, but also by adjusting to the physical and biological environmental changes and situations. So think of energy being consumed to adapt for temperature. So maybe there's extreme coldness, or if there's an extreme change in the amount of food or kilocalories. Maybe someone is fasting or in starvation mode, doesn't have access to food for a long time. Or maybe that body is going under physical or emotional trauma or stress. This category of energy is incorporating the additional demands from a patient being sick or maybe a patient in the process of recovery. Because the expenditure demands are individualized variables, we can't calculate it into an average energy requirement. So the total energy expenditure, or the TEE, has a direct impact on the maintenance of our overall weight. And sustaining a healthy weight is influenced by our energy input. How do we input energy? We eat food. We consume food. And then also our TEE, or total energy expenditure, is dependent on our energy output, or our voluntary physical activity. And that is what we're going to discuss next. The term healthy weight, by definition of this textbook, is a weight at which an individual can physically move comfortably, maintain without undue restriction of food. So they're following healthy eating guidelines and they're not performing excessive exercise. A healthy weight is a weight where a person can live without experiencing any weight related or weight associated disorders, such as diabetes and hypertension, coronary artery disease, or hyperlipidemia. If one of these associated disorders does develop, then lifestyle changes can be initiated to achieve this quote healthier weight. So, the definition of healthier weight involves a weight loss of 10 to 16 pounds for most patients, accompanied by healthy lifestyle behaviors. So, in response to increasing concerns about our weight related health disorders, which we discussed earlier, there are concepts of healthier weights that are being used and explored now. And we're trying to incorporate that into many health promotion programs. We're trying to change the perspective of what healthy weight means and how to manage this healthy body composition. These programs will focus not only on encouraging dieting and weight loss, but also further the prevention of obesity by promoting healthy eating, exercise lifestyles, and also the by deterring these chronic illnesses. The special programs are launched by government health departments. They are launched by hospitals and even your insurance companies. Many of you might have been solicited by your insurance company to join a weight loss program, and they will capture some data from you and then therefore give you some premium reduction. Your textbook says that body weight is the most common way to estimate a person's quote fatness. Weight is used to determine an estimation of wellness, even though our bodies are made up differently and they're made up of fat, but also bone, muscle, and non-fatty tissue, like lean body mass. So weighing is generally an idea that can work, but it's not very individualized because the composition of lean body mass will change over time. This is why you might see two people at the same height and at the same weight appear to look very different. So we can assume if the scale shows that we are a pound heavier this week than we were last week, that may not just be because of fat, but we're making the assumption that week to week it can be caused by the gain of fat. There are several situations in which weight is not a good measurement of how fat we are at all. And this is because there's fluctuation in how much fluid our body retains. And so let's say during certain periods of time, no pun intended, thinking about right before menstruation or during actually even warmer, hot weather, our fat gain and losses may be different. And that fluid amount may also be different. So what we see on the scale may not be very accurate at all. So in these circumstances, normalizing the fluid balance makes the apparent fat change promptly disappear. But on the other hand, the scale is also very misleading for anybody that's tried to use it to determine their lean body mass because it deviates a lot from what is expected. A bodybuilder has a higher portion of lean body mass than an average person, and they may weigh more even at the same height, but their muscles may weigh more. But someone who suffers from maybe a wasting tissue disease is going to have less lean tissue. Because weighing is so convenient, though, this is what remains the standard of how we measure someone's fat. But really, to determine body composition, which means lean body mass plus body fat, we need to consider other means. How else can we measure? And this is where we start to use anthropometric measurements. This is how we assess or distinguish between fat rather than other body compositions or components on the basis of our patient's physical differences. Anthropometric measurement. We also can measure by using underwater density. And this is the most widely accepted and the most often used as a validity of measurement. This is called a densitometer. But unfortunately, densitometry is very bulky, it's very expensive, and we're not really all willing to be submerged in water. It's not very practical. So, what is the practical way of measuring? Your book says that the practical alternative is bioelectric impedance analysis, or BIA. And this method can be offered to you at fitness centers, and maybe even health programs may also provide bioelectric impedance analysis. It's far better in terms of accuracy. It uses 4 electrodes. They place the electrodes on the wrists and the ankles, and they're going to monitor the passage of electrical current. 2 electrodes for foot-to-foot passage are not as accurate, but also can be available a little bit more simpler than the 4 electrode method. So how do they measure this? Well, because fat is a poor conductor of electricity, the conductivity is occurring through the non-fat parts of your body. So bioelectric impedance analysis will estimate the amount of lean body mass, and then the amount of fat is calculated from the difference. BIA is safe, inexpensive, can be performed very easily, and is reasonably accurate, but not really considered sensitive enough to detect any day-to-day changes for someone that is really actively trying to gain or lose fat. Hydration levels, though, are a little bit difficult because they may affect the accuracy of your BIA readings as well. Now, other methods of assessing fat levels are tricep skin folds. We can also measure mid-upper arm circumference. But just like the other methods, we're really not able to detect day-to-day changes. And now you can see how complicated measuring a person's body fatness really is, and why most individuals revert back to the common scale. You can see in your book, there is the body mass index table, or BMI. And BMI is calculated by dividing the weight in kilograms by the square of the height of a person in meters. And this calculation yields a value that then can be interpreted by a healthcare professional like yourself without further referencing any other modality. BMI can be determined and then related to a particular health risk by looking at the table and deciding, is this person underweight, normal weight, overweight, obese, or severely obese? And there is still some controversy to the BMI chart and whether the standard should be increased as we get older, and whether the health risk evidence really supports the BMI. Mortality is higher for individuals at the lowest BMI and highest BMI levels for patients that are considered older adults. So it's really quite interesting that as we age, being too low in BMI or being too high in BMI can both increase our mortality. being mid range is appearing to be a place that will put older adults at less risk. But we also have to think about the fact that BMI is going to be widely used and it's pretty convenient and really still the measuring gold standard that we are using currently. Trying to estimate a person's weight so that we can find a estimation of fat. But when both weight and fat are measured on men and women, there are usually some individuals who have a weight to height ratio considered normal, but the levels of body fat are beyond what is recommended. So here you can see that BMI is not always accurate. On the other hand, there are other patients who could be considered overweight by the BMI standards, but when you go to measure their actual fat ratios or body fat, they really are not over fat. So think about what patients these may be. Someone who is more physically active, a bodybuilder, or an extreme athlete may appear to have a BMI that is over the standard, but when you go to actually measure body fat, they actually have more lean muscle. Why do we need body fat, or why are we even discussing body fat? Well, our body fat serves a number of vital functions. We can't live without some type of body fat. For most people, the majority of their body fat is storage fat, unfortunately. And a layer of this fat under our skin provides protection from extremes of environmental temperatures. It also defends us and cushions us, but some of us may have a little bit more defense than we need. What do I mean by defense? Well, fat defends many internal organs against physical trauma. However, when we're storing too much fat, it can actually harm those internal organs, especially in our midsection. In addition to the storage of fat, there's a small amount of fat that serves vital functions such as membrane integrity. And we also know that when appropriate amounts of storage fat are added to essential fat for men, the recommended range for total fat becomes 15 to 20% of the actual body weight. In women, the concept of essential fat, we need to expand even further to include very gender-specific fat in our breast and pelvic areas, our buttocks, and also thinking about how our body changes during childbearing, the need for increased fat also during lactation as well. So for women, the minimal levels of fatness compatible with health are based on the essential fat, plus we get a little bit of a bump for gender-specific fat areas that range from 12 to 14% of our body weight. Healthy levels of total fat will range from 25 to 30. The location of our fat is also important. Now think about the different types and shapes and patterns of fat distribution that we have noticed out and about. And these differences are related to not only gender, age, and developmental stage, but also can be different among ethnic groups as well. So think about, in terms of body shapes, we have we have apple shapes, and these are sometimes called android body types. They're biggest around the waist, whereas pears or gynoid types are biggest in the hips, buttocks, and upper thighs. And although some evenly proportioned people don't fit either category, most of the pear-shaped individuals are women, and most of the apple shapes are men or older women. Now, this focuses attention on the location of fat, which largely will determine the effect on the patient's health, because we're thinking specifically about visceral fat in the abdominal area. Now, this fat along the visceral or abdominal cavity seems to much more dangerously affect the body because it's surrounding our abdominal organs. Now, although some sophisticated techniques can more accurately assess fat distribution patterns, this just generally becomes a good way to estimate by comparing waist circumference to hip circumference. So, what are the ratios? For men, it is healthier to have a waist to hip ratio of less than 0.95 to 1. Whereas in women, we should have a ratio of 0.8 or less. So again, this is determining the waist circumference to the hip circumference. Now, the diameter of your waist alone provides a good estimate of the fat in your abdominal area. And people with waist measurements over 40 for men and then over 35 for women are going to be at the greatest risk for chronic diseases that are associated with obesity. However, for those of Asian descent, a higher risk is associated with waist measurements of less degree. So for those of us that are Asian descent, for men, anything over 36 inches, and for women, anything over 32 inches will increase our risk for chronic disease and related with obesity. Most of the fat in our body is going to be stored in adipocytes, and these are special cells that make up adipose tissue or fat tissue. And each of these adipocytes has a nucleus, a mitochondria, and other organelles, just like the other cells do. But what's different is that they usually are squeezed over just a little to make room for a droplet of stored fat. That droplet is what we call a triglyceride, the same type of molecule that makes up most of the fat that we eat. Triglycerides are synthesized from glucose, glycerol, fatty acids, and even amino acids that are carried to the adipocyte by the bloodstream. Now, this stored fat or triglyceride is in a constant state of flux and becomes a triglyceride breaking down while other triglycerides are being built up. And this net effect of this triglyceride flux is how much fat is actually being stored. Depends on how much energy is taken in versus used. Now, if we need energy, the balance is going to shift and favor the breakdown of triglycerides. And the release of fatty acids and glycerol will then be transported to various cells, being oxidized, and then it will convert to support the different energy needs and the different molecules that may need this conversion. When we're ready to supply energy that the triglycerides can provide, then we will have a net loss of triglycerides. But what happens right after we eat? Well, that balance is going to shift and we are going to have an increase of triglycerides, and this is going to tilt towards storage unless we expend that energy. So when we're born, we will have a very small number of adipocytes, right? Just a small number of fat cells. But over the years, the number of the cells will increase. And this is a example of hyperplasia. But we also will have an increase in size, which is an example of hypertrophy. And hypertrophy occurs when there's too much energy balance at any time. So when we are storing more than we're using. Hyperplasia, however, is the more specialized process that occurs during the growth spurts that we have as we are turning into adults and accompanies normal development. This growth-related hyperplasia occurs at different times in the lifespan. It occurs during infancy, during preschool, adolescence, and also again during pregnancy. The adolescent increase in the number of fat cells is going to be more pronounced in girls than in boys, and it results in higher level of body fat found in girls and women. And this is a normal amount of increase. So if more energy is then used than expended, then we have a loss of fat. But if more energy is consumed or eaten than used, that fat will go to become that fat droplet. And then it reaches its maximum size, and there you have a fat cell. Now, if the positive energy balance continues, the body will make new adipocytes, so it increases the number of fat cells, and then expands also the storage capacity. The stored fat is relatively equally divided, so all cells contain less than their maximum capacity. Body's kind of smart that way. Then it's able to continue to expand our storage capacity as long as the positive energy balance persists. However, when fat's lost, whether through a reduced intake or if we increase physical activity or even in times of illness, that fat will mobilize from the adipocyte to meet energy needs. And then we lose that fat. This reduces the size of the droplet of that stored fat, and it produces a then smaller adipocyte or fat cell. So let's give an example. If we have a patient that has been obese and then loses a large amount of fat, the adipocytes may become quite tiny again, smaller than the cells of people who were never fat. Our bodies seem to monitor the size of our adipocytes and will interpret the shrunken cells as evidence of imminent starvation. Well, what will happen? The body may kick in and say, you need to eat more. So our patients may feel that need to eat more, even though they really don't. And although the response mechanisms aren't really fully understood at this time, the effects of metabolism and drive to eat clearly develop as a means to reverse this threat of further fat loss. It's like trying to survive. Now, that set of responses is really part of the theory that is being studied and heavily not understood very well because we've been dealing with this concept of fat for so long, but it's part of the concept of why patients gain back the weight that they lose. If you've ever tried to lose weight or have listened to any type of weight loss guru, you will know that 1 pound of fat is approximately 3,500 kilocalories. So many times it's thought that if you can put yourself in a deficit of 3,500 calories, then you would be able to lose a pound of fat. Now, when excess energy is available, we synthesize triglycerides and store them into adipose tissue. And when there's a shortage of energy, then the triglycerides will break down and that energy will be used. And that was the whole concept of losing weight or losing fat specifically. But the bottom line in adjustment of body fat is the status of the body's energy balance. And when energy intake exceeds the expenditure, we will gain fat. When it's less than the expenditure, we start to lose some fat. But it's not really that simple. The theory is, again, that a pound of fat equals approximately the equivalent of 3,500 kilocalories. So if you would just break that down into, let's say, a period of 7 days or a week, starving yourself or I don't want to use the word starving, let's say reducing 500 calories a day for 7 days would eventually lead to a pound of fat loss. However, this doesn't always happen because, of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Genetics also affects our body weight. There are very highly researched studies that support this. And They do note that there are similarities of BMI value among first degree family members, but it's not always fact. Think about your own family and the first degree relatives that you have. Not everyone may be obese and not everyone may be super thin. But family studies do reveal that obese children tend to be the offspring of obese parents. And some studies can't separate, though, the intermingling effects of what's genetic and what's environment. So we can't conclude specifically that this is all linked by genetic reasons, but there is similarity. Genetic influence related to obesity includes not only fat, but the endocrine influence of hormones, leptin, and ghrelin. So let's talk about those two hormones for a second. Leptin, which is actually a hormone produced by your adipocytes, plays a role in the complex system of the regulation of your body fat and your weight composition. Leptin inhibits food intake and regulates your long-term appetite. So the size of adipose stores is regulated through the messages that are transported by this leptin hormone. And it is transmitted by leptin between the brain and the leptin receptors. Mutations and functions of leptin and leptin receptors have a role in the development of obesity because it's really telling you, should you eat more? Do you want to eat more? It's regulating your appetite. But this association is more theoretic than diagnosable, right? It's still theory. Additionally, leptin has a role in supporting functions of the body that require amounts of energy sustaining. And think about during times of reproduction and puberty, leptin plays a role to let your body know that you may need to increase your appetite. It regulates these actions according to the adequacy of nutrient stores in your body. Many of our body regulations are maintained at a constant level within a narrow range. Think of our glucose level, our blood pressure, our acidity levels. These are just examples. Now, typically, when a problem is corrected within our body, the characteristic will return back to our usual levels, right? So think about when we're sick, maybe our blood pressure increases, our glucose increases, but eventually it comes back down to a particular level. So this is what we mean when we say natural level or set point. Now, this term usually indicates not a single point, but a range. So we're going to keep within that concept, the natural level or range. The adjustment of our bodies will make to return to a set point. This is called defending the set point. So we can define set point as a natural level that the body regulates or defends. And because energy is in high priority for the body, the level of energy stores is not going to just be left by chance or without regulation. It also is regulated. And for most adults, it's a pretty remarkably stable concept. It will really return to the usual level after large gains and losses. Despite minor gains over the years, body fat and thin people alike, we will return to a quote set point. But for most part, our adult weights are pretty constant unless we are going to actively make some changes because there is natural regulation of our body. There's evidence that our bodies defend a particular set point. And this is why it proves to be so difficult for some patients who have been overweight for a long period of time to change that set point. The regulation is skewed toward prevention of weight loss rather than the avoidance of weight gain. So it's clear why adult humans have a affinity or a range of set points for body fatness. Okay, well, the theory describes the set point mechanism can be described into three different components. Some characteristics that the body monitors, but also that there are some kind of messengers that carry this information between the CNS and the mechanisms of responses that exert control, and evidence suggests the fatness, lean muscle mass, and the body mass generally is all being monitored. All right, though. This concept of set point is still pretty controversial. Some of the controversy involves the question of like, does a set point change when you're old? Is it a set point versus a set range? Also, are we just talking about weight, fat, lean body mass? What is actually under regulation? And then also that there are some people that resist the concept because they feel that if you think about set point, then it really is going to discourage someone's motivation to lose weight or to improve their health behaviors because there's a set point that is regulating whether or not they can be a certain weight. So, in the discussion of regulation of food intake, one aspect of set point control was identified. And when an individual's weight or fatness is less than what the body perceives as appropriate, your body again increases leptin, increases that drive to eat, and becomes activated. And even though the person may experience some short term satiety, meaning that they feel very satisfied or full, the long term hunger drive apparently is going to outweigh this and will increase this, the need or this appetite will increase to bring that body back up to that set point. Although an individual may learn to ignore this drive of appetite, there is no evidence in studies that it actually goes away. So this individual becomes very vulnerable to disinhibition and over time will lead to potentially excessive food intake. And this is where we have patients that will start to binge eat. And it seems to take effect in attention to resist this hunger drive. And it really takes a toll over some patients psychologically. Now, some people come back from, let's say, a particular situation, vacation, holiday, which they've overeaten or they overate and they gain weight during that time. And then they say, oh my gosh, I've eaten so much, I'm not hungry anymore. But unfortunately, this type of hunger adjustment is very, very rare. And it's more common that people will then experience an increased degree of hunger. And it usually takes a increased period of time to get back to that particular set point. And they will have periods of overeating. Fortunately, though, the energy use efficiency part of regulation works a little bit better, and that regulation system of limiting food intake in a situation can sometimes be curbed. There is a little bit of good news. The body can adjust to the efficiency of energy in different ways. We're only going to talk about a few here and think about the rate of energy metabolism implemented primarily through the adjustment in resting energy expenditure, or REE. And the level of total energy, TEF, and the energy costs of a given amount of physical activity are probably affected as well. So resting energy expenditure is a major component of total energy expenditure and usually accounts for about half of our total energy expenditure. So when we reduce food, it will produce an immediate and significant depression in our REE. And this is going to drop and stay depressed throughout this period of lowered food intake. But if the depression is not very great at all, that reduction is not very great, then it may be sufficient, this drop in REE, and we're not going to see any weight loss. And this is a defense of the set point. But with greater dietary restriction, we can adjust that and start to lose weight. And this is producing a departure from set point, at least temporarily. But when weight is lost, there's a loss also of energy use. And this change also depresses your REE. The adjustments greatly slow the rate of weight loss because of the defense of the set point. And then most of the time, through this mechanism, the weight then is going to be regained. But let's talk about what really is important. And when you set a goal for your patient or with your patient, we should consider these opposing factors. Each person is individual and unique. Their values, needs, and characteristics are different. Also, you have to consider the limits to the extent of control that a person may have over their body or their level of fatness. The most important goal as we work with our patients is related to behavior changes. By choosing appropriate behaviors for change, we can help our patients to establish new habits. And these new habits over time may gradually grow into long term habits and lifestyle modifications that can help meet the patient's individual needs. Now, think about habits that can be established to help long term. Maybe planning and shopping and making lists, all great things that many of you discussed in your previous online discussion board. For other people, planning may not be the goal of choice at all. It may be irrelevant. Maybe they do plan, but it's what they plan that tends to be the factor. Also, you want to normalize eating. The goal isn't to make them not want to eat or have a negative relationship with food. It's trying to increase how the patient may perceive eating as enjoyable, even when they are foods that are healthy for their body. In normalizing eating, we strive to retain the enjoyment of the process of nourishment, and it involves eating with awareness. Also, relaxing while we eat, not feeling guilty while we eat, and allowing ourselves to eat with the appropriate quantities to sustain ourselves or until satiety happens. Now, enjoyment can be enhanced by keeping meals and snacks very simple. Many of you discussed this as well, but also giving yourselves alternatives through the week so that you're not feeling like you're restricting everything all at once. But despite the emphasis on enjoyment, normal eating doesn't mean just eating everything you want that makes you feel happy or pleasurable, but also enjoying what you eat when you are knowingly feeding yourself with something nutritious, like a plain glass of water.
It often takes a lot of work to understand our hunger and satiety cues. Now, hunger cues let us know that we are hungry, and satiety, or that feeling of satiation, feeling full or not wanting more, um, it becomes a little bit harder to feel this than to sense the hunger cues. Oftentimes, even our hunger cues get confused with other emotions like tiredness, anxiety, the relief of anxiety. And what will happen is we start to respond to what we would suspect are our hunger cues. And though there are different patterns of eating in response to these feelings, many patients may not be aware that they really are dealing with other emotional states rather than true physiologic hunger. And when this helps, again, journaling through your emotions, trying to think about alternative responses by recording your feelings, coping behaviors that you're already working with can be helpful. However, for some patients, this may not be enough and they may need some outside counseling help as well. And probably we're never going to be able to completely give up the use of food to meet our emotional needs. And that's not what I'm trying to say we should do, but we should hopefully become more aware of ourselves and the way we see food and the reasons why we consume certain foods so that we might be able to better understand our patients. Additionally, we might want to take some time to ask them and to sit and talk through the understanding of food for them. Some key ideas are to minimize the use of food to meet emotional needs. We talked about being more aware, but also the textbook is preaching that we should eat regularly and frequently. And many times, just by planning ahead, it will help reduce the amount of calories or additional calories that we may not need. Now, there is some controversy regarding how often you should eat, and what types of food to eat and why in different periods of life. And I encourage you all to go look at the current literature, especially what has been published in the last, 2 to 5 years. And even then, exercise and nutrition science changes so rapidly that you may want to look for something even more um, up to date. But what I'm saying is that there is controversy of the frequency versus intermittent fasting versus the amount of macros and micros you should be eating, protein versus fat versus carbohydrate content. So it is up to you this semester to investigate what works for different types of patients. And additionally, that extra layer now is to think about in terms of not only the body type of the patient or the emotional state of the patient, but what about the physiologic and pathophysiologic processes that they're going through. If they have a certain disease, what might be more available to them and what might be more beneficial to them. Now, in thinking about the maintenance of our weight and how nutrition helps to balance this, we do need to promote and actually adopt an active lifestyle ourselves. This helps to increase our energy expenditure, how much energy our bodies are actually using on a day to day. And it will help us to maintain our lean body mass, which then improves the overall metabolic function of our bodies individually. It is known to improve other health conditions. It will allow us to have an increased response to exercise. But also, when we are thinking about how to incorporate exercise, we want to individualize that plan to that specific patient. So now we're going to move on to the fitness essentials. And this term, physical activity, you may have heard your own healthcare provider say, yes, you need to increase your physical activity. The definition is any body movement produced by the skeletal muscles that are requiring an increase in the energy expenditure. So not just your normal breathing and everyday, walking to your car, getting into your car, walking to work, etc., but the additional energy expenditure of that day. And it's going to vary by the time of day, the year, the stages of a person's life and also the healthcare stages of their life as well. Now, it can be similar to physical fitness, but there is a nuance difference in the definitions. Now, physical activity describes our actions, our overall movements that we're making to stay fit. Now, physical fitness describes the limits on the actions that we're capable of making. So everyone can perform the same activity, but will have a different physical fitness level accomplishing that activity. Now, when we think about being fit, it is not just about being fast or strong. True physical fitness has to have three major components. We should be flexible, we're talking about muscular strength, and additionally, we're talking about endurance or overall cardiovascular endurance. Okay, so flexibility, muscular strength, and cardiovascular endurance. Now, flexibility is our ability to move our muscles to the full extent in which they were purposely designed to do without injury. Muscular strength and endurance, this is the description of our ability to perform hard and prolonged work using our muscles to accomplish that. And lastly, cardiovascular endurance is our ability for our body to deliver the amount of oxygen that is necessary to accomplish that physical activity. Now, flexibility, muscular strength, and endurance are important components of health and well-being, for sure. But without cardiovascular endurance, we wouldn't have the ability to actually perform any of those functions. we need to have cardiovascular endurance, and we want to measure cardiovascular endurance because this is indeed the best physiologic index of total body endurance. And our life depends on the strength of our heart and the strength of our lungs to not only provide nutrients and oxygen to the cells, but to perform the everyday functions of our body that we may overlook. All right, so as we delve deeper into the benefits of physical exercise, I want you to just be aware of box 9.4 in your textbook. And it does go over my plate and why physical activity is important. And if you look at the different areas of box 9.4, it will tell you about the reasons why the increase in physical activity can lead to improved physical fitness. But other than that, the other physiologic changes that occur in your body. Now, people who exercise regularly often just overall adopt a healthier lifestyle. They may stop smoking. They have more energy, so they're handling stress better. Because they're handling stress better, they may be more aware of their emotional state. They're making wiser food choices. All of these things are going to then culminate into the improvement of the quality of life. But we also need to think about people with physical disabilities. Now, they also benefit from moderate amounts of physical activity. And although the population of patients with a disabling condition tend not to perform regular exercise, it's still a risk factor for chronic disease. So we need to help them think about how to moderate their exercise, how to modify their exercise as well. Now, other benefits of increased physical exercise is that increased stamina that we're going to have and the muscle strength and overall just improvement of our mental well-being, our spiritual well-being. These are all tied in to studies that have shown a reduction of anxiety and depression with an increase in physical activity. There are disparities in physical activity levels in different American subgroups, and you will see that understanding the differences in these subgroups will help you to reduce the disparity because it will allow you to know that for each of these subgroups, you should increase your patient teaching about the benefits of exercise and provide the appropriate information and the appropriate referrals for exercise programs. And as a nurse working in the healthcare system, it is our job, our position to identify so that we can suggest the referrals to these programs. Now, the physical activity doesn't need to be strenuous to achieve healthful benefits. People need to be counseled in such a manner because they may be deterred from increasing their physical fitness or trying to increase their physical activity level because they feel like they're not able to do it. So, meeting them where they are, helping them to understand that they can modify different activities, that it's all in moderation, and that we can start slow will help open up the doors for more conversation and hopefully increase their fitness level over time. So here is box 9.4, which I was alluding to. And you can use this to help talk through with your patients the reasons why physical activity can help. You can see the different tenets. And something that we didn't talk about previously is that it also helps you to sleep better at night. And it allows you to overall increase the chances of a longer life. Now, if you're not physically active, you also want to tell them what the consequences could be or the risks. And you can see that heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, having a stroke, all of these things are increased risks if you are not physically active. And then, of course, you can see the different activities that are especially beneficial to patients. Okay, so according to your textbook, the nutritional needs of athletes are not different from those patients that are non-athletes, with the exception of the amount of kilocalories and fluids. Now, a diet that has a good variety of food, which your textbook is explaining as 45 to 65% coming from carbs, 20 to 35% coming from fat, and 10 to 35% coming from protein. This is what's recommended by the National Research Council. However, a lot has changed in those amounts and the definition of what amount of kilocalories you should have from each of those macronutrients. Some forms of heavy training for athletes increases the requirements of the certain nutrients. And there's still a lot of controversy out there, different diets that we have heard about and seen that have a variation of the different percentages as well. Again, you are encouraged to go out and see what is the most up-to-date research. Now, what we do want to take from this is that each patient is individual. They're individualized by their gender, their different physiologic state, their current physical activity level, and any type of pathophysiologic disease process that they are dealing with. The important thing to think about is that your kilocalorie requirement is going to help balance your energy expended. So the amount of energy that is used to burn calories throughout the day needs to be replenished so that you can have the normal physiologic state that you're in. And the more athletic you are, excuse me, I should backtrack and say the more physically active you are, the more energy you are probably expending. So you may need to increase the amount of each of these macronutrients and the overall amount of um, kilocalories per day. Per the book, it says that there's a minimum requirement for college athletes to consume about 1,800 to 2,000 kilocalories a day. And eating less than this can leave that athlete feeling weak and feeling like they have fatigue and no energy. This overall can lead to iron deficiency, stress fractures. For women specifically, it can lead to amenorrhea and osteoporosis. In the next slide, you're going to see different tables for adequate fluid replacement and the amount of recovery fluids and food after exercise. Now, this is getting into a lot of exercise science, so we're not going to go too deep into this, but for some of you, this might be very interesting. And so you'll do a deeper dive in this section. But overall, when you're exercising, you're at risk of becoming dehydrated. And for nursing students, we refer to this as fluid volume deficit. And especially if our patients are training when it's very hot, because we sweat and we lose water. And the rates of sweat vary among people and the level of activity, but usually it's about 2 to 3% of our weight via sweat can impair our performance. Now, when water loss via our sweat isn't replaced, the overall blood volume in our body will fall, which will then kick our body temperature to rise up. With this, we can have dehydration, we can have confusion and loss of coordination, leading to more injury or be more prone to injury. So, in order to replace the water loss during physical activity, we need to consume extra fluids. And the sense of thirst isn't the best indicator. Just because we don't feel thirsty doesn't necessarily mean that our body doesn't need more water. And the fluids that we need may be greater than what our body's thirst ability can actually gauge. So, before, during, and after you are physically active, you should be increasing your water intake. There are some controversies with sports drinks as well, and many times we're thinking about, should we be replacing our fluids during exercise with sports drinks? And really, it's because we're trying to replace our electrolytes. Now, think about this. Athletes participating in endurance events require more than 90 minutes of continuous moderate to heavy exercise. Okay, so that's what an endurance event is being defined as, like distance running or cycling. So anything more than an hour and a half, they're going to benefit from sports drinks because they need to replace the carbohydrates and the electrolytes like sodium and potassium. But many times our regular or probably irregular 30 to 40 minutes of physical activity a day does not require a replacement with sports drinks. And here are the two boxes I was referring to help you to better manage for yourself, but also to think about how to discuss fluid replacement and um, nutrient replacement with your patients after physical activity. All right. Additionally, if you're thinking about carb loading, and you probably heard that term, especially if you've run any race or if you've heard people around you talking about carb loading because they're training for some type of competition, high carb diets become part of regular training programs for most athletes. The book says at least 60%, but more preferably up to 70% of the total calories needs to come from carbohydrates for these type of athletes. And those that are eating about 3,000 kilocalories a day, the proportion needs to represent at least 450 grams of carbs within that 3,000 kilocalories a day. Now, again, these are for athletes that are engaging in 90 minutes or more of continuous activity. Okay, so you don't need to carb load to take a 20-minute walk during the day. But if you are, running maybe 10 miles and it's taking you 90 minutes or more, then you need to perhaps increase your carbs for energy expenditure. The book says it's not recommended actually to increase your carbs or to carb load when you're playing things like football, baseball, wrestling. You shouldn't need to do that. Nor should individuals with diabetes or hypoglycemia consider um, changing the dietary pattern and increasing carbohydrates because this can affect actually carb metabolism. And I would even say that carb loading doesn't work for all athletes the same way. It is very different, and things that can contribute to those differences is just the makeup of the athlete, what they're actually doing, and how carbs are being processed in their own body. And so, again, this is going to change from individual to individual. Athletes should determine before their athletic event, how valuable is carb loading to themselves? What have they noticed in the past, rather than just carb loading because they feel like that's what you're supposed to do. Because there are some negative effects of carbohydrate loading. Carbs will increase your retention of water, increase your weight gain then. Carbs can also increase stiffness, cramping, and cause digestive problems, especially, if you're going to participate in some type of endurance event. These are things that you do not want to be dealing with while performing your athletic endurance event. The DRI or the dietary reference intake for protein of an athlete is going to be different than for a sedentary adult. For someone that doesn't do much activity, zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is what the DRI is. But researchers suggest that for athletes, you need between 1.5 and 2 grams of protein for every kilogram of body weight per day. So think about what you would need for a 150-pound athlete. So this patient then is 68 kilograms. And they're going to need about 102 to 130, 136 grams of protein per day, because you're going to take 68 and multiply that by 1.5 or 2 to get that amount of protein. You also want to think about what type of protein is being eaten. When you are consuming that additional protein, studies suggest that athletes that are increasing protein to meet their expenditure needs should be eating meat, fish, poultry, eggs, milk, or cheese. They will have no problem doing um, or meeting their protein needs if they're eating these types of foods. But if you have a vegetarian athlete or a vegan athlete, this may become a little bit more challenging, I would say, to meet the protein needs of 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, there's always protein bars to supplement some protein, and many athletes and many just overall patients use protein bars to meet their overall protein intake as well. But what I would say is just look at the packaging and the ingredients, because that excess intake of protein also can be masked with simple sugars and other types of carbohydrates within those bars as well. So you're not just getting pure protein. And then in terms of protein or other amino acid supplementation, this is very common, not only with athletes, but just everyday people now. You go into Costco and there's a whole row of protein drinks, shakes, and supplemental powders. Various combinations of the individual amino acids are also sold to patients too, with the promise of releasing growth hormone. And then hopefully, athletes are looking at this and thinking, wow, I can also increase my muscle mass. So you want to make sure that you are educating your patients too, including yourself, to read the labels specifically and to think about the claims that are being made. The question that you're thinking about is really, do athletes need to take these supplements, or can they get protein from food alone? Also, can our patients get the amount of protein that they need in food alone versus all the other supplementations that are out there as well? Now, think about the body and its inability to store extra protein. And what will happen is this excess protein and amino acids are going to be broken down, used for energy, or it's going to be stored as fat. It just doesn't stay as protein. And if protein or amino acid supplements provide more nutrients that are needed for what our body actually needs in terms of protein function, then the body treats all of this extra supplementation of protein the same way, and it considers it to be excess source of protein. Also, think about, you know, especially with our patients now, you're thinking about cost of what we're suggesting to them. Is it safer and cheaper to have protein supplementation rather than, eating a piece of turkey or other protein-rich food? What actually works for their lifestyle and also their budget? Okay. With athletic performance, we also have to think about fat. Fat, along with carbohydrates, are a major source of energy for athletic performance, for endurance, especially. And obviously, we're thinking about exercise that is performed under aerobic conditions are going to promote fat use as a source of energy. And so, this is why it's really good to have some aerobic conditioning as part of our physical activity routine. It's going to increase our body's ability to burn fat as fuel. Using fat as a source of energy also helps to spare the glycogen in our muscles. Athletes specifically, they need a certain amount of fat in their diets, just like we talked about with carbohydrates and proteins. Um, the challenge, though, is eating a diet that provides the right amount. And the position that the American Dietetic Association takes, these are an association of dietitians, also the College of Sports Medicine, they all recommend moderate energy intake of 20 to 25% energy coming from fat. And this is out of a study from 2016. So think about this. This is still 10 years old now. So I would go out and do some research and think about, does this still stay true? Overall, though, the concept is that everyone is different, whether they're a physically active person, they would consider them athletic, or they're sedentary. We need to be eating a certain amount of fat. And the more active we are, we may need a little extra fat in our diet. Overall, the textbook is telling us that if we have a diet with more than 35% of total kilocalories coming from fat, we are at an increased risk of certain diet-related diseases like heart disease, obesity, and even cancer. So what we're looking for is, yes, we're going to increase our fat intake if we're more athletic and more active, but we should still be choosing lean meats, fish, poultry, and low-fat dairy products when available. Fats and oils used in cooking, frying foods, and high fat snacks, they should be used sparingly and in moderation. And lastly, let's talk about vitamin and minerals for athletes. We want to make sure that they are not uh, taking in an excessive amount, which is very common. We know that nutritional supplements are a multi-million dollar business, and sometimes, um, most times, athletes are being the targets of these supplements. And so, what your textbook is wanting you to understand is that a balanced diet generally supplies enough vitamins and minerals. So if you're not starting with a balanced diet, then you may need the supplementation, but we should all be striving for this balanced diet. Now, there are many reasons why different patients will take vitamin and mineral supplements, and we're talking about athletic patients here, we're talking about athletes, because they want extra energy. But sometimes they're not eating well and they know this, so they're going to supplement their poor diet. But the problem is that some people think about supplementation, and the more that they take, the better. And so they'll take excessive amounts. And for many of these types of patients, the level of nutrients consumed from food alone is greater than 200% of the DRI for that specific vitamin or mineral. And then they get more supplementation combined with the food, they may be exceeding even 1,000% or more of the daily recommended intake or the DRI. And this can cause toxicity for some of those vitamin and mineral levels. So, of course, this is going to be the main idea of your education with vitamin and supplementation for your patients. Also, thinking about ergogenic aids. The term ergogenic we don't use very often, but this is used to describe drugs and dietary regimens that are believed to increase our strength, our power, and our endurance. And if you wanted to look more into that, table 9.8 in your book will show you some more of these. Because we're always thinking about, winning or personal records, personal bests. And so for athletes, they may be looking into any additional way to do this. Now, nutritional supplement use by athletes constantly change, especially now with social media. We tend to like have different fads that come in and out very quickly, and then they are um, served all to the mass media, and people catch on really quickly, and so things are changing very, very quickly these days. But some of the commonly used nutritional aids that would fall under the ergogenic aids, something called DHEA, um, dehydro epiandrosterone, DHEA. You may have seen that. You may have seen beta hydroxy beta methylbutyrate, or HMB, on some of the packaging. So just things to think about. And then also creatine powder, which is a protein, creatine monohydrate. But with the exception of creatine, research has not found that any of these supplements actually increase performance. Okay, so that's the latest and greatest in terms of those types of ergogenic diet aids. One last thing I just wanted to remind you all in talking with your patients about supplementations and diet aids. Um, Several different supplements, if you're taking them all at one time because you're trying to, fulfill this thing or that thing, they may have some cross nutrients or cross vitamins and minerals. And so, think about if your supplement bottle here on the right has all these things plus vitamin A. I'm just using vitamin A as an example. And then you have another supplement bottle here on the left, and you have other things in there, but also it has vitamin A. This can lead to toxicity of vitamin A. So you want to educate your patients and yourself to look at the nutrient interactions also, and also think about the daily recommended intake values. Are you going over? And how is this in combination with what you are actually consuming as food? The role of a nurse has seemed to evolve in this area over time. But what we need to understand is that we have the help and support of a dietitian. And we don't need to know everything about everything. We need to know and understand the role of a dietitian is also evolving, from, just being a counselor and educator who gives dietary advice, but also that therapy aspect, right? Counseling, knowing the different types of psychodynamic models of therapy to help assist and coach our clients. We kind of need to have some of those skills as well and reach out to those individuals that have that specialty. So our role is going to be overarching, and that can seem a little overwhelming, especially since we may not have all those skills yet. The main idea, though, is to help our patients through with motivational interviewing, weight management, understanding that this is a lifelong process and it does incorporate broader lifestyle skills and just losing weight for the moment. We need to overall help them to understand we're trying to achieve a healthier weight and fitness goal to achieve healthier body composition and overall physiologic health. Now, dietitians can coach clients about the process of food choice, shifting the responsibility of that decision about food and portion to the client once they understand this information. But our client has to make the overall choice as well. And we still, again, want to make sure that our patients are enjoying food. They're not looking at food negatively, but they're using food to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Dietitians are part of a multidisciplinary team. We may not always have access to a dietitian depending on where we practice. It's amazing when we do. I get to work alongside a dietitian, call her up at any time and her team to help with my patients' needs. It's magical if you have it. If you don't, then over time, you're going to learn the different styles of coaching your patients through food choices with experience, but also with practice. So if you don't try to make that initial step to remain knowledgeable about lifestyle changes and choices for our patients about food and how food definitely is medicine and how food is the substance that sustains every aspect of our life, including our ability to breathe and our heart to beat, then we're not going to be very successful in teaching our patients. So we need to believe that first. So this is again where it's up to you to do a deeper dive in your own understanding of food, your own understanding of hunger cues and satiety and activity levels, so that you can better be or be a better part, excuse me, of the multidisciplinary health team that's going to help our patients through these different aspects of their health.